Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. And if you're watching live, you're watching on Tuesday afternoon at 6 p.m. The phone-in number here, as always, is 640-3091. Love to hear your opinion. You don't necessarily have to agree with me or disagree with me. If you have something to offer or a question to ask about education, please do so. I'll be introducing my guest in a minute. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Bolgen Vargas of the Manchester School District with us, the Superintendent of Schools, on tonight. And so you might actually get some real facts as opposed to what I might be giving you. Once again, as you know, this show is repeated multiple times during the week, so if you miss us here on Tuesday night, there are multiple opportunities to see it during the week, and and you can see it on YouTube at any time. So with that, Dr. Vargas, welcome to Education Matters. I think this is your second, or I think it's your second visit, maybe.
It is,
maybe
yeah, it is.
Very delighted to have you, and
it's good to be here. Thank you to you.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time to be here. And, people know me well enough to know that I'm not in the business of throwing softballs and sort of saying platitudes, for the sake of that.
I used to play baseball, so you can throw me.
Okay. So no, but what I wanted to say was, I'm very aware of how much time your job takes. And anybody who's paying attention and watches public television sees you at school board meetings and at subcommittee meetings and parent meetings. And your coffee mornings, etc. So I know there's a lot of work to be done outside of running this, almost $200 million enterprise that you're responsible for. So I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to come with us here today.
You.
And as you know, you're always welcome. I'd like to start to talk about most days when I start this show, I try to talk about some positive things, and sometimes we talk about positive things all day, but sometimes it slides into negativity before we get to the end.
Oh, yeah.
So, but there's a couple just off the top of my head. I'm thinking about stuff that happened this week, and as I say to people often, we never had to go back and talk about something that happened 3, 4, or 5 weeks ago, because in Manchester School District, it's so dynamic. There's something new every week.
Correct.
So this week we had the robotics team at Memorial that won an award up in Detroit, a national award, which is big doings for the district, and for the congratulations to the team at Memorial. And on another side, we had a young lady from Memorial win the Miss New Hampshire. Yeah. So incredible what our young people can do, right?
Incredible is the right word. Well, let me just say that every day we have great things going on in the Manchester public school system. We educate 14,000 students, and we're very proud. And we educate the most vulnerable to the strongest who are children, and we are very proud to serve our families, and this community is a great district. I was having a conversation with a music teacher this afternoon, and I said Manchester has so many bright spots. Our music program is second to none. Right. I would like anyone to compare us anywhere in this state or in this region, and we could be great in everything that we do. We're just going to need to provide a little bit more support to our teachers and our schools.
Right.
And we will see a good system becoming a great system, right, that everybody will be incredibly proud.
And one of the places,
and we have a lot of proud people because of the work that they do every day.
And one of the places we see in the music program, especially, I'm proud that my son is I have 2 kids left in the system, one graduating right now, but my son, who's a sophomore, is in the band, and I know from looking at that music program going back through the years that it's a place where it's a wonderful opportunity for parents to be, and all the schools have got strong parent groups, often very small. They're not. Yeah. It doesn't have to be 50 people, but it's a great example. Anybody who's watching, and if they think about where do they want to approach education, how might they help. the music programs are always in need of help. You know, when the bands are marching,
Yeah.
just carry a bottle of water with them. You know, and then when they set up to play, you know, I see those parents go out and set things up, etc. It's wonderful. I do know that one of the good things would be nice in the future would be we used to have a at the superintendent or assistant superintendent level, or maybe just underneath that, sorry. It was underneath that. But it was a director of arts.
Yeah.
And it was actually Chris Martin, Dr.
Yes,
Chris Martin used to
yes.
have that position long, long ago.
Yeah.
And that position was eliminated probably 10 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
But it meant that the various people in the music department at the high schools and the middle schools had somebody who could look at it sort of programmatically.
Correct. Yeah.
And then the other thing, I know that when it comes to the library for music, you know, there really isn't any specific funding for that or a place to do it. So, and it's great, you know, we have teachers do it, and the music teachers take that responsibility, and they catalog the music and they keep it and make sure they have it. But these are, I don't know if that, some people would say we're straying into the like to haves when there are so many great needs, but having somebody looking at both art, music, and all those other activities that are non-directly academic, because they are so important.
Actually, they are directly academic. That's one of the greatest mistakes that a lot of districts have made, and thank God that we haven't made that mistake here. We should be very proud of arts, music, sport, extracurricular activity, and as you mentioned, the robotics and all the opportunities that we have available to our students are phenomenal.
Right.
And I thank everyone that pay taxes here in Manchester and the state of New Hampshire, and for that matter in the nation, because we get funding for all three levels. However, by any account, we are not receiving the resources that we need to provide our students with all the opportunity that they deserve. Like, for example, right now, we are running middle school. We are a social worker. And I like to talk about what we have. I can spend the whole evening talking about the great things, but also we have to be, the responsible thing for a superintendent to do is to point out those areas that our children desperately need. Like, for example, in today's world, in the kind of challenge that we are facing here with the opioid epidemic and all the challenges, our children deserve school with a social worker that could work with the families. Because after all, if we don't engage the families in a meaningful way, our job becomes harder and harder. It doesn't mean that we cannot educate the child, but it's much harder to do it alone. And we need to do it together, the family, the community, and the school.
And in that regard, so are we, the current, we just have come through the budget season. We headed into this year for multiple years in a row. We came into this year spending less per student than every other district in the state of New Hampshire. We came into this year with the highest number of children per teacher of any district in the state of New Hampshire. And now we have a budget that, well, let me ask you, what effect will the budget have on those two sort of big items?
Well, being specific, I'm asking the city and everyone here in Manchester to take, and in the state for that matter, because education is a matter of the state as well as the local community. That's how the system was designed to work, and that's when it worked best, when the state and the local community are investing in education. I think it's a mistake to think that all the responsibility should be left to the local taxpayer, particularly when a lot of the obligation and also policy that drive costs I manage it and designed by the state. But putting that aside, the bottom line is that we've been very specific in what our children need and what our teachers need. And I'm not asking for all the things that we need.
Right.
We have been very responsible. Like right now, I'm asking for additional revenue to put social worker in our school. to continue to reduce class sizes in our school, which, by the way, we to offer foreign languages at the middle school. Until last year, we didn't offer foreign languages or health in the middle school. Now we're building the middle, if you will, by adding, hopefully we can secure the resources to make sure that we have French, we have a math curriculum second to none, and also that we have the teacher to teach high-level math and science and computer sciences. And our school, the vision is to make them as competitive. No family will be turned away from us because they cannot find the services and the academic support that they find in the surrounding district. For example, if you look at Goffstown, not too far from us, students in there have an opportunity to take 3 and 4 languages, French, Spanish, German in the middle school. They have an opportunity to take Algebra 1 and 2, and not just for few kids, but for a significant number of students. So we are looking at our school from that lens, meaning, and we are ahead in so many areas, like, for example, art and music, we are doing fairly well. We just need to rebuild some area of the system, such as, for example, the socio-emotional support that our students need, and also the academic. At the end of the day, the system continued to work in our mission, which is to educate our children. However, we do know that we had to meet the academic, socio-emotional, and physical need of our children in order for them to strive. And we need to do that in conjunction with the family and with our community. And I cannot be more proud of the support that this community, when we give our school and business, colleges and university, the Boys and Girls Club, the you name it, the health department for the city. Everybody here is pulling in the same direction. What we have to make sure is that we are making sure that we are investing in those areas that we need and those areas that we had neglected for quite some time, or things that we used to have that are necessary for a healthy system to deliver a good quality education for every child.
For too long, there was a period in Manchester, particularly, there was a period in Manchester where everything was going in the wrong direction. That sounds, it's probably not even true to put it so directly as that. But the conversation was always about, for a long time, was about what else can we minimally do with, and what could we get rid of next, almost. So there was a built-in presumption that we can't afford to do that which we do. And that was, there might have been, I never agreed with that, and I've been consistent for a long time, but there was some, at least, rationale for it, say back in 2008, when the economy was in terrible trouble, when people were losing their homes and the mortgage problem and all those things. And you could say it was more difficult for someone like me to sit here and say, we've got to hold the line on education, that's our future, this is what makes our economy. That we still have people, though, having the same attitude when we have close to full employment and we have a booming city and lots of things go on, make it much. I find that just very disturbing, because my thought is, if we can't do it now, then when? There probably won't be a better background. Let me ask you something about. I've said to you before, and people here are not surprised. You're right about the staff, the people who work in our schools, and the people surrounding our schools, and government agencies and in private businesses around the city. But one of the places, when I look at our middle schools, I've watched our middle school principals over a period of time
Yeah.
represent the schools, and there was a meeting that very few people may have seen because it was a committee meeting and also one of the teachers there who does ELL, English Language Learners classes, Mr. Pat O'Neill, was on, and Mr. Krantz and Mr. McCafferty. Mr. Cranston from McLaughlin, Mr. Cafferty of Hillside, and there was a great discussion on the Joint Education Committee around the needs, the needs in our district for kids who had problems that were not being met by our district. I find it difficult to encapsulate all that conversation, and we're not going to be able to do it here, but it seemed to me that some of the board members were receptive to the idea, and it came as news to them. Would you like to, can you offer something in that area, the areas where we're falling behind with children who have particular needs that are not being met by the district around social or educational needs, mental health needs, etc.?
Well, let me begin, like I say, just using common sense. We do know for a very long time that when a child has a social worker, and not every child needs one,
right.
But what I love about public education in this country is about all.
Right.
It's not about some of us doing better, but it's an educational system that is trying to position that child to take advantage of all the opportunity that are available to them in society, and they need an education. In order to do that, we need to meet the needs of our children. And I mentioned the word social worker because in the 21st century, we do know that we cannot run our elementary, middle, or even high school without a social worker because children need that kind of support. For example, we are very fortunate to have a significant number of students that are middle class, and people are invested. There's an incredible legacy here. People love our school. However, we do have some students that are less fortunate,
Right.
that they need that support, and one place that they find it is at the school level, and that's why in this budget, and it would be my goal to make sure that our school are well staffed to take care of the multiple challenges that our students are facing. Like, for example, this year alone, we have served over 600 students that are homeless.
Right.
And I'm very proud that we can serve those kids at the same time that we serve children that are very fortunate, that they never have, and thank God they never will, lose that family support.
Right.
But for the system to work well, we have to take into consideration the needs of every child.
Yep.
And every teacher and every staff member, because in order to support our children, we have to support our teachers and our principal and staff. They need our support. And as I said, this is a very generous community. However, there's no question in my mind that I hope that this community we take a close look at our school and begin to become familiar with our needs, which are many, but the good news is that we are doing great work and our potential is enormous. Also, our children's potential are incredible. Our students are smart and talented and have the ability that any other group of children have here in the state of New Hampshire, the nation, or the world.
Right.
So we do know that our children are not the problem. They are actually the solution to our future.
Right.
And if we ignore that, then we will be unfortunately making a big mistake. And that's why I want everybody to take an objective look at our schools, the needs of our kids, and how to best we can meet those needs.
Now, last year, we had this process, which I thought was and I think most people, so everybody's not paying attention all the time, right? There are people who, if they don't have a kid in school, then they hear something about schools when there's a headline hits the union leader.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, it's like, if you don't ever go over to Elliott or CMC Hospital because you have the good fortune to have good health, you just drive by, you know it's there. And you expect that it's got doctors and nurses in it, and there are beds, and there are people getting the
That's
medicine
right.
they need. And a lot of people in our community, I forget sometimes because I'm talking about it every day, that a lot of people drive down Porter Street and outside Memorial or over opposite West or all our other schools, and they just presume that there are teachers and kids doing everything that they should do, and they don't. And they think it almost happens by magic, that we don't have to think about it, and we do. And last year was important in this regard, because last year the additional $2 million, which was over and above the tax cap budget, which would have given us 1.6% increase, I think it was last year, which was clearly inadequate to maintain the existing. But you came forward with a budget for $2 million additional monies and said, this is necessary for our schools, and if you give me the $2 million, this is where I'm going to spend it. And you laid that out, and it had the middle school languages in it, the 4 health teachers for the middle schools, the retaining the 2 SROs, and we could go through the other things. A lot of stuff was included in that $2 million. And what it did was it put the lie to the whole idea that some people had in their heads, that you'll hear people repeat often, that, that school district, you give them more money, and they tell you they need money for books and they go spend it on something else. So you established last year that wasn't the case. And I was hopeful then that this year something similar would happen, that we'd be able to, because, you take the 14 aldermen and you say to them, look, so we lived up to our commitment last year. So are we going to see any such effort this year?
Absolutely, that's exactly right. Allow me to say, I think that we were stuck around this whole issue of redistricting.
Right.
And some of us thought that redistrict alone could solve everything. And I wish that was true. And that we didn't need to invest a single dollar more than what we are already spending. And I think that that's, number one, that we did lose a lot of time with that conversation. The perspective that I wrote to the board, and I'm trying to encourage all of us to look at, if you were to move children, let's say from now the 5th grader, which we will move to the middle school,
right,
but you continue to run middle school without the necessary support, academic, social, and emotional, to meet the needs of every child, then we might as well keep the kids where they are. If you continue to have the larger class sizes in the state of New Hampshire, and for example, when I first arrived here, I was bothered by the fact that we had 30 kindergarten in a classroom. Granted, it was not in every kindergarten class, but every child matter. If every child matter, I had to be concerned about every classroom. And all of us need to be concerned. So we began to say, why are we going to do redistrict? Well, one of the goals is to make sure that our class sizes are at least similar to the class sizes that you find in the surrounding district.
Right.
And what you will find is that when you have 30 kindergarten students in one classroom with one teacher, that is not the best way to educate our children, because one teacher with 30 kindergarten, I offer to anyone who want, if they want to try, we still have some class with about 27.
Yeah.
They're welcome to come and spend an hour there.
Right.
And I will tell you that the conclusion would be that we need to strive at least to have 20 kids with one teacher. Now, in the surrounding district, arguably with children with less ranges of needs, for example, in Bedford, the class size for kindergarten is 20 students with one teacher and one paraprofessional. Now, our recommendation call for 20 with one teacher, no paraprofessional, because we are mindful that we have resource limitation.
Right.
However, we need to make sure that we are not doing things that are not good for our kids, like or for our teacher, for that matter. And so back to your question, you will find a great deal of specificity in our proposal. You will have more social worker, more French teacher, continue the class sizes that we have, provide and strengthening our middle school, and the math curriculum need to be revisited. And also we need to provide teachers with more text tools, professional development, and the support that they need to do a job. Now, let me tell you that, for example, we are very good in many areas. One area that this country have become a superpower is the military. And one of the reasons is that we know that we cannot send a soldier to an area of conflict without the right equipment and with the appropriate support. We should never send our teacher to teach unless we give them the right support. Why? Because education is one of the most essential tasks of our society, is to educate the next generation of citizens. Otherwise, if we fail to do that, it's putting our community and our country at risk. And educating our students is paramount to the task of guaranteeing a good future, not for the individual child or their family, but for all of us.
Right. You know, in the state of New Hampshire, we have a problem statewide with a population that's growing older. And we have the oldest or second oldest population in the United States. And you know, without having to draw all the in-between steps, it's clear that this is going to have a major impact on the future of our economy, on jobs, on business. You know, if you're going to open there's a business today announced that just got $2.5 million. It's a spin-off out of the guys who started Dine, who've been like a little powerhouse there, a big powerhouse of innovation, etc. And but I see these companies in the Mill District, etc., and they need qualified young people. And this goes way beyond education, as you know, Dr. Vargas. It goes about housing availability, taxation policy, the whole thing. But we start, you know, one of the pillars that, if you were the state director of the economic development or something, one of the pillars that the state needs is a strong education system to attract young families. So it isn't just a Manchester problem. It's a statewide problem. And I've tried in the past with our congressional delegation, with our 2 senators, with our 2 congressional members. I've met with them and their representatives, trying to expand the conversation about Manchester. Since Manchester is 1 in 12 kids in the state, I've said, as Manchester goes, so goes the state. And their first response, all 4 of them, was, well, you know, local education is not an issue, is not a congressional or Senate issue. And I kind of forcefully pushed back and said it is. What I'm leading to, I guess, is that while I think that Manchester taxpayers need to be told regularly that they spend less on education than everybody else, and they don't like to hear that, and they're listening here. And but on the state level, what reception have you had, or have you tried to carry the Manchester message to the State Department of Education and to state representatives? And is there a reception there to understand that the downshifting of costs has got to stop, and we've got to? Yeah. Or is that something you've started yet?
Oh, yeah, I testified there recently, and I told them that they need, at the very least, to put a moratorium. But let me go back to your comment about the Manchester community here. I think that we are supporting our school to a great extent, more than what the community get credit for. The challenge for us has been that, to your point, take, for example, we spend over $11,000 per kid. So we're getting less than half for the cost per pupil from the state and the federal government. So we are paying greater share of that expenditure when we are educating children. For example, right now I have children that have one-on-one nurses.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, guarantee the right of the citizen, that's a federal role.
Right.
And one that, and we are very proud that we educate children in that situation, that they need that kind of level of support. However, I'm sorry to hear that the congressional delegation from here doesn't recognize that, for example, for every dollar that we spend for children with special need, here in Manchester, we're getting only 14 cents.
Right.
And which is much less than even people in other community are getting. So we need to work with them, and they need to work with us to meet the totality of needs of our children. This cannot be left to the shoulder of the taxpayers of here in Manchester alone. This had to be a state issue. Like, for example, right now we don't get a single dollar of support for the pension system. In 2008 or 2009, they did away with the state support,
Right.
which, by the way, is called the New Hampshire pension system,
Yeah, not the Manchester
and
pension system.
which, by the way, have been designed for state to provide support. So I find it interesting. The state has a surplus. We are struggling here in Manchester a little bit in finding, and I think we need to work together and just be honest with one another that we had to work together, collaborative, and to support every child in the state of New Hampshire. The children in New Hampshire are children of the state.
Right.
They are part of our future, and we need to stop with this situation. When it comes to education, it's an obligation of all of us, and we need to be fair. It's extremely unfair. I mean, the state might as well, by the way, the money that they give us, and I just, at some point I might say, any increase that you give us, just keep it for the pension increase. And by the way, they're building a obligation.
Right.
That at one point for years, most generational students that we're educating in this system in New Hampshire used to be, they were beneficiary of that strong support from the state.
Right.
Today, the support from the state of New Hampshire is as weaker as ever,
Right.
at least in recent history.
But and not just, well, I can stray into politics even if you can't. And we have public representatives in the state of in the Manchester area who represent Manchester, who go up to Concord, and on that specific issue of the funding of the state pension, voted against a bill just recently. So it's very disturbing to see local politicians that are voting against the interests of what in the end the taxpayers here.
And I would say that we have to understand that this is a democratic process, so which I treasure.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my job is to make the case of what our children need. I work for children, by the way. The school board is my boss, but I hope that they pay me to work for kids.
Right. Yes.
And to work for our teacher, and to work for our principal, and for the people that are serving our kids. So I just wish that people listen more careful when I tell them what their needs are. For example, our cost in special education is increasing in an incredible way, and that is because we have more children with special needs.
Right.
And we know the reason. We are in the middle of opioid epidemic crisis. So, a lot of families are hurting. And we are very proud to serve every family, but that need to be understood.
Right.
That our children need, the kind of support that we allow them to strive.
Right. And I've been saying that when we talk, it's no secret that I'm not a fan of the tax cap, because I'm very open about that. I think it's a bad idea. It's a blunt instrument. By the way, if there was ever an alternative universe where I thought that our school district was now getting too much money and it was being wasteful and all the rest of it, I'd be all for reducing spending in real terms. So I'm neither married to it on the upside or the downside. Today we need greater funding, but I take the opioid crisis as an example. If you think about the tax cap as being, or this is what we're going to spend on our schools, it makes the presumption that everything in the schools, that the needs are going to remain the same, that we have a constant need, therefore we can have constant funding. It's clear, it should be clear to, it is a democracy, so we're appealing to people who listen to understand that when there's a large change in needs, and the opioid crisis is an example of a large change in needs. We have children who don't have the support at home or are, in various ways impacted by the opioid crisis. That falls to the schools. Even though some people don't like to hear that, we have children in schools who are struggling socially, they're struggling economically, they're struggling through the crisis itself and all the other things. And our schools have to take up that task and carry it, and therefore there is additional spending. And so it should be an easy enough logical exercise for taxpayers in Manchester, and I know they're strapped and I understand that. But since we have an additional cost, then somebody has to carry that cost. And secondly, and I know I'm pontificating here, but I just want to say something else. Back in whenever we passed the Community Mental Health Act in 1984, whatever it was, or earlier than that, up until then we had children in what I would call warehouses, in red brick buildings with iron bars on the window up in Concord, and we took kids with all kinds of disabilities, and we had state programs. They may have been good or not good, but there was a whole state expenditure. Now, we have eliminated all of that, which I think is a good thing. We now are able to mainstream the vast majority of our children. But now that when people talk about the schools they were in 1965, they don't look like that anymore. So there's a need for additional services and additional funding.
Correct.
And it's a constant effort, and why we're here tonight is to, to explain to people and to push out the fact that these needs are there.
Correct. And let me just say, as you know, if you were to take a look at Nashua, the next city, closest to us and the second largest city here in the state of New Hampshire, they spend, just for us to spend similar to Nashua, which is one of the lowest spending district in the state.
Right. It's the 10th lowest.
No, actually,
we're the lowest. They're number 10.
And in one area they're number 3.
Okay.
For high school, but putting that aside, they're in the lowest 10.
Right.
And we are in the bottom, the lowest in expenditure.
Right.
And if we were to catch up with Nashua, we would have to come in, and I would say that when I say we, I mean the federal, the state, and the local community. We had to come with at least $14 million.
Right. Just
for us to be, and we still be in the lowest. However, I would tell you that we can do incredible amount of work with that kind of money, and we will be able to prove it to the taxpayer. Actually, there will be so much transparency. Let's say where that kind of money will go, that I think we all be proud of the things that we'll be able to do for children here in our community. But putting that aside, let me just say that when we come to children needs, I understand that because that some people might have different opinion, and that's okay. That had to be appreciated. So if it's someone, sometimes there's so much complexity. Like, for example, the issue that you mentioned, that there have been policy shift, practices, like at one point, children with severe mental health, we used to put them in a restricted location. They were state facility. We send those children out to the local community. We are very proud to serve them, but we need policymakers to understand that that requires additional costs and additional effort in the part of local schools. And for too long, we ask our school to do everything. And I think that we bear some obligation, because we say, give me the poor and I will educate them.
Right.
Give me those kids in need. And that's great. I'm very proud to be associated with a system that serve the most vulnerable to the most healthier.
Right. Right.
And that's a great things for our society to be proud of. That we serve every child. However, at the same time, it does require for a policymaker to acknowledge that a city like Manchester need extra support because we have a higher concentration of children in poverty. We have a higher concentration with children with special needs, and we have a higher concentration with children with more challenge. Now, let me see if this makes sense to you. We're spending much, much less on the children that need it the most than we are spending on the children that need it the least. And that doesn't mean that every child doesn't need here. Right. By the way, you could come from strong family, rich, middle class, upper income, and a great believer that we need to invest in every child.
Right.
However, we also need to make sure that the system is working for every kid.
And I, one of the things, I was listening to a piece on the BBC this week about education over there, and like in every society all over the world, these issues are talked about all the time. But in the English system, they've spent a lot of time, looking at causes and effects. And one of the things they notice is that the difference between the poorest children in the country and the most affluent kids in the country, as they enter the school system for the first time at around the age of 5, they've established that there's a 19-month difference between the average poorest kid and in preparedness for school. That's almost 2 years, and they're only 5 years old, and they're already 2 years behind. Let me just address a couple of things. There's somebody who has sent a couple of texts in here that are interesting. One of them is he has expressed disappointment. This is School Bill, or Senate Bill 193.
Yeah.
And I was up, I know you spoke on this bill a few weeks ago. I spoke just after you, actually. You had left, and I was the last speaker, the last time there to speak on this topic and opposing it. But as this person has pointed out, it was very disappointing today. As I said at the start, we never have to talk about what happened 3 weeks ago, right? Today we have, I know this is maybe sensitive for you, but I think it's important for people to know. There are 14 school board members in Manchester. Yeah. Two of them were in Concord today talking in favor of Senate Bill 193, which would take perhaps $2 million or so out of Manchester public schools tomorrow if that bill is passed. And there's an example to me of people who are arguing against the public interest in Manchester.
Yeah, and I think the signs of an educated person is to be able to see the other side. And I think that I've tried to model that in here so that we could disagree without being disagreeable, or getting into conflict turning into a power struggle. Right. Or disagreement into conflict and power struggle, and trying to stay away with that. But let me just say that the people, I don't support 193. My board gave me the vote to go and testify and also to advocate against. And I'm well pleased by that. However, there are those who believe that that if his family wants to choose a different school other than the traditional public school, in some cases they go as far as to say that they could go to a private school, that's a good thing. And people can argue both points. I'm familiar with the school choice movement. Actually, it was invented by a University of Chicago professor, Milton Friedman. He came from an economist, not necessarily from an educator, but putting that aside, he was an educator, by the way. I correct myself. He was a professor or academic and a very distinguished person. And that have been tried in the school choice movement. And at the end of the day, what we know so far, that the fact will tell us that there is not an easy answer to the complex problem that we are finding to educate every child. By the way, this nation always has done well by educating as a portion or our population, but we haven't arrived. By definition, for example, we have the nation is graduating about 84 to 85% of the population. We have about 15% of the student here in New Hampshire. In Manchester, we are leaving over 20% of our kids don't graduate.
Right.
So
there's a place there's work needed right there, right?
Exactly.
Before you ever start taking money out of the public school system.
That is one thing that I always, and what I'm arguing is that people are looking at this in isolation. For example, I was asked, can you absorb, the funding loss? I say the challenge is not to look at this as a singular issue. I say yes, if you were to bring back the design of the pension system, the building aids, and other area. But in the past 6-7 years, everything that they've done in Concord is to transfer the cost to the local taxpayer. Take, for example, and I have a good track record in working with charter school, so I support every school, but it is hard for me to explain to people that our costs for special education have increased as a result of charter school. Our costs for transportation have increased as a result of charter school.
Right.
As long as you acknowledge the fact that we are spending significant amount of resources and work with us to mitigate our loss, then I think that we can all be more comfortable with our disagreement. But I do have the discomfort on my part is that I do know that sometimes some children will get hurt if we don't bring the complexity of the issue to the table. And it's never simple. I mean,
Right.
It's not as simple. And I also will say to us that we need a strong public education system, strong as ever, because the society is more complex. But and you need educating a child is much harder than it used to be because
Right.
the complexity. Take, for example, one of our obligations is to help our children make the right decision to keep our democracy going. And today, as you know, it's not easy to find out what position is someone standing and researching and understanding the complexity of your vote.
Right.
It used to be much easier.
Right.
Because society was less complex, and not to mention the economy. But let me conclude by saying that at the end of the day, we need to work together for children. And we need to remind ourselves that even today, the number one choice, and I tell that to my friends in both sides, is a neighborhood school.
Right.
The parent choices in America today is neighborhood school. And we owe it as their representative to make sure that every school in every neighborhood in here is strong. Even or if you have a system of choice, that is fine, but you got to make sure that the needs of every child is met
across those schools.
Yeah.
We're close to it. We've about 10 minutes left, and there's a couple of things. Somebody else has well, we've got a caller on line one. Let's see what we have. Good evening, caller. Who's calling?
Robert.
Hey, Robert. Good evening and welcome. What would you like to offer?
Excuse me, could you repeat? I don't hear well.
I'm saying, what is it you would like to discuss, or what question do you have?
It has to do with the school system now the superintendent's on.
Okay, go ahead. You're on. Go ahead, caller.
Okay, a couple of things on the mind here as a taxpayer that I'm elderly. I don't have any children in class. We keep hearing about how little we spend proportionately per student, but I don't hear anything about the salaries for the teachers that impact the amount that it costs to run the schools. Now, the other thing I want to need to talk about is this emphasis on tuition students coming in from other towns. Okay, everybody talks about how much we're losing by they're not coming here, but nobody can pinpoint a number how much it costs to have them. So could you clarify that for me? Add to that, okay, teachers just got done with school vacation week, April. They had another one in February. They work 180 hours, 180 days a year, okay? And I submit that if we put a lid on the teachers' raises, we'd have more money for the students. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Robert. Well, first of all, I'd like to jump in. I'll let you in. But first of all, just with regard to the contributing towns, we don't have contributing towns anymore. I mean, there's a legacy piece where I think the last of the students are this year, or the vast majority of them. So that's an issue that had been discussed at length in the Manchester School District, and we were told, just like the redistricting issue went on and on and on, and we couldn't get beyond it, for 10 years or more, there was a discussion about the surrounding towns, sending people, and every conversation went in that direction. So that second half of what you said, Robert, is largely a moot point today because it's not impacting the district. We don't have kids coming in generally anymore from out surrounding towns, and so it's not. That's not the issue. With regard to the issue about teacher pay, and I'll leave it to Dr. Vargas since we're stuck for time. But I would point out that teachers in Manchester, there was a survey done by the union leader 3 years ago to look at teacher compensation across the 5 largest towns in the state. That was Rochester, Nashua, Concord, Portsmouth, and Manchester. And Manchester teachers were the 4th lowest of the 5 in terms of compensation. But I'm not here to argue in favour or against them. I'm just pointing out it's not as though Manchester teachers are getting paid excessively highly. But Dr. Vargas, if you respond to Robert.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea about the sending town, how much money it would cost us to educate a child from the sending town is over 11,000. But putting that aside, that gives you an indication how much we do with less. As a taxpayer, I understand your concern, particularly being someone that just, you didn't use this word, and perhaps it's not accurate, but most elderly, for the most part, sometimes, not always, are on fixed income.
Right.
And I think that we need to recognize that. And so when I talk about resources for our system, I take that into consideration. That's why you heard me saying that and if you, by the way, if one day you want to visit our school and see where your money is going, I'm more than happy to take you in a tour and to show you. And also what you will find was that you will find hardworking people, teachers, spending money out of their own pocket because in some situations we are not buying enough paper for them, enough books, and painting their own room. Our teachers are doing much more with less than most teachers in the state of New Hampshire. So that's why I said that I like to, I appreciate your question, and even for me to show you and to sit down the list of things that teacher ask me as a superintendent that I'm not able to provide to them because of the cost. Now, your question around the teacher salary. What we have here in Manchester is a structural budget gap. Structural budget gap is due to multiple reasons. One of which is that you had a system that for more than half a century was designed, the pension system, for the cost to be shared by the state and the local district. The taxpayer in Manchester, for example, in the last 10 years have allocated over $20 million to the district. Over 40% of that went just to the pension system, to that alone. Then you look at the building aid. By the way, the pension system, we used to receive 35% of the costs associated with our pension system went to the was covered by the state. Now, the people who run the pension system, even in a good economy, our pension costs continue to go up for all kinds of reasons. I know at one point someone told me that the pension system here in New Hampshire got in trouble for mistakes that were made, and the economy was in decline, and therefore one of the solutions was to shift the cost back to the local community. That is hurting not just Manchester, but it's hurting the entire state, and it's very difficult for me to ask an individual like you to say, by the way, I need your support to increase your taxes. You don't see where it's going, and then you see that it's going into the pension system, and that we still don't have the appropriate textbook and all the support that we need. The problem in Manchester, of course, common sense would tell you that number one, I think that you will agree with me that because of inflation and cost of living increase, that you had to take that into consideration when it comes to teacher salary and compensation. But let me also say that that what I find in difficulty is having a conversation where people take the totality of the situation that we are facing. I find people that they want to have a conversation for me, and I won't go against common sense. Common sense tells me that if you get less to teacher, that you can spend more somewhere else. But I would say to you that a lot of the costs that we are experiencing right now, we used to get significant support to repair our buildings. We used to get various, let me just conclude by saying to you is that the Congress, who is responsible for the law that were passed to educate every child with disability in the least restricted environment, meaning we are very proud to do that, in the local community, they were supposed to pay 40% of the cost, only because they know that when a child, for example, needs one-on-one nurses and a special transportation and a specialized vehicle, that you have additional support, that people like you who are in fixed income should not be absorbing all the costs. Right now we are getting 14%
Right.
of the commitment that they stated, their word, their commitment, not mine. However, they have reneged their own responsibility.
Right, and we're down to about 2 minutes here, so I want to give you a chance to finish. But I do want to say that, most people are very fair-minded and logic applies. And when they see a child, or we see that the school board sees every day, or the school district sees every day, a child shows up that is either physically or intellectually disabled or whatever it might be, and they're sitting there in front of you, and it's another one, just one more has arrived. That's an additional requirement. It's a properly equipped minibus or van that's going to have to get them and bring them into the school. Or if the taxpayers say, well, no, we want it to be done in some other building, great, let's do it there. But most rational taxpayers wouldn't say, well, little Johnny, that's tough on him in the wheelchair. We're all out of money. We're not going to do anything with him. The school district doesn't have that and doesn't want to have that position. Does a wonderful job of meeting the needs of kids wherever they are across the entire spectrum. And so I think most rational people would look at the situation and say, we have to put the resources in place for the population that we have. Dr. Vargas, we're down to about a minute.
Yeah.
I'd like to give it to you to address things more generally about whatever you'd like to say to people.
I just wanted, I think the caller makes a great point and deserves it. And the best answer that I could give when I say that our children, we have a challenge to educate every child because it's needed. Like, for example, I came to this country as an immigrant. I had a job on the second day to help support my family as a 17 years old. I was able to pump gas without knowing a single word of English. All I needed to learn, that they told me in less than an hour, was about 3 to 5 words to work in a gas station. Those jobs, those opportunities are gone. And we need, as a society, to understand that actually the thing that I lose more sleep is trying to say what kind of preparation we need to provide our children in order to navigate a complex world that is ever-changing. So I thank you for your question, and I do understand your concern about the ability of certain segment of our population to pay taxes.
Thank you, Dr. Vargas. I appreciate you coming in once again. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're rushing here at the end of the hour. Thank you for giving us all your time, and thank you for what you do. You have a great support in the community. You should be assured of that. And thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next week. Good night.